It was past midnight when I finally got out of bed after hours of trying unsuccessfully to sleep. The shadows of the night enveloped the house and I slowly made my way like a ghost to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. My gaze fell on the burning light in the living room. And in that moment an uneasy feeling swept over me, foreshadowing a change. That night, like so many others, was full of memories. Hours before Ms. Sister Annie had begged me to take in her son Lucas for the duration of her divorce proceedings. We had already experienced so much loss in our family. I had lost my husband Jacob in the last 5 years. He left so suddenly, leaving a void in my heart that nothing could fill. We were building our dream home, and in an instant everything came to a screeching halt when his life was cut short by a heart attack. A lot of time has passed since that day, but the bitterness of loss continued to haunt me. I knew that family had to be there for me in times of need, and I was ready to have Lucas' shoulder to lean on. But that night when I walked into the living room and saw him sitting on the couch watching a romantic movie on TV, I was overcome with a strange feeling. It seemed that this movie, which played a kind of love show, was a quiet escape from reality. The feelings of acute loneliness crept back into my soul. I had no desire to sink back into gray reality, and I began to realize that maybe spending time with Lucas would make the night less empty. I contemplated spending at least a little time with him, feeling someone alive around me. When he noticed me asking I've woken me up, I felt a shiver run through my body. In a nightgown that no longer fit my refined image, but was familiar to me, I felt the excitement over meeting. There were feelings raging inside that I couldn't and wouldn't talk about out loud. I had just come to fetch water, but there was hope brewing in my heart. When he offered to sit next to me, hesitantly accepted his invitation. It was a small step, but in that moment it felt like I had crossed the line that separated me from a life of tenderness and love. I settled down next to him, and with every minute I spent in his company, my inner restlessness receded. The movie was on, and though I couldn't concentration its plot, his mere presence sharpened all my senses. Every time I caught a glimpse of Lucas, I felt warm and anxious. At the same time, I felt a small but meaningful connection forming between us. Wasn't judging me for being alone, nor was he judging me for being awkward, just being there for me. The veil of the night was growing heavy, and I noticed Lucas was gripped by the same anxiety that I was. It was hard for him to let go of his loss, and I knew that fear of getting closer was creeping into our hearts. Button, that fear lurked, a temptation I couldn't ignore. I looked at him, and the world around me disappeared. Some time passed, and I involuntarily touched his arm just to feel his warmth. He froze for a moment, but not from the one touch, but from the deepest realization that we were both suffering loss. In that moment, by fate, I realized what intimacy was like. I could lose him as I had lost my husband, but at the same time I wanted to know what it was like to be loved again. The night moved on, and as the movie came to an end, a strange calmness swept over me. When I came back to reality, I realized that Lucas wasn't there. He was already gone. I was alone, but there was a lightness in my soul that I hadn't felt in a long time. I realized that despite all the loss, life goes on. The next day when I woke up, something changed inside. I was ready to start a new chapter in me life, even if it took time. I knew one thing: I had to allow myself to transgress the boundaries I had built myself and let the emotions repressed in me heart awaken. It might be a difficult path. Booty was no longer willing to stay in the shadows. From this day forward, every new opportunity, every new encounter would have meaning. I was ready for pain, but also for happiness, ready to seek out new facets of love that would make me alive. And on this journey, I hoped that I could once again find the light that mid-year Jacob had once led, but there was a fire inside me that I couldn't ignore. Memories of the night we'd sat together on the couch and watched a romantic movie wouldn't leave me. It was as if time had slowed down and everything around me had become secondary. Every moment spent with Lucas reminded me of forgotten feelings, of what it meant to be close, and of how forbidding it had been. After losing Jacob, I remember my heart pounding in unison with the melody of the movie that night. There was a slight nervousness that came over us as the romantic scenes unfolded in the screen. I couldn't take my eyes off his expressive eyes that looked at me with such sincerity. It was as if we were both watching a story that mirrored our own lives. The passing relationships that might have arisen, the elusive feelings we were once so close to. The touch was so sharp. When I accidentally touched his hand, it was a moment I won't forget. I felt the space between us rapidly shrink and my heart beat faster. Lewis paused for a moment, his breathing slightly shaky, and in that moment I realized that a spark had ignited inside of me that I hadn't even realized. I became too wary, too cautious, as I sensed that this could go wrong. When the movie was over, I got up and left for my room, leaving behind silence and a lot of confusion. I made myself comfortable on my bed, feeling the need to process mindly emerged emotions. This night was more than just an ordinary evening. It was the beginning of something new, something I had been searching for so long, but was afraid to ask of fate. The morning of the next day greeted me with light and a leisurely quiet day. I decided to do yoga, hoping to use the practice to release the inner turmoil that had been exacerbated by my encounter with Lucas. I needed to feel alive, eager to take care of myself rather than being swept away in dark memories. I had no way to be alone. I was full of expectations and vague hopes. I sat down on the mat And as I began the flowing movement meant I felt harmony being restored within me. Every pose, every bend, every inhale and exhale filled me with energy. I was immersed in me thoughts when I suddenly noticed Lucas standing in the doorway. Watching, he didn't say a word, but his presence made me freeze in that moment. There was an invisible connection between us, creating an atmosphere in which emotions sprouted like flowers. After winter I continued to perform the asses in unison with my breathing, while Lucas stood there like a root anchored in the ground watching. There was vibrancy and tenderness in his gaze, absorbing every movement, every moment. I tried to concentrate on the practice, but my senses raged inside me like a hurricane that had built up strength. The low bends carried me into a state of deep relaxation, but at the same time my thoughts returned to Lucas again and again. With his silent attention came a new wave of longing, a desire to get closer, to allow myself to be vulnerable. Finished practicing, I finally looked up and met his gaze. In that moment I realized how this simple scene was a reflection of my doubts and desires. He was good looking, and his sincerity appealed to me. By the evening our time together blossomed with new hues. Lucas and I uncorked our wine, and each sip felt like a reminder that life goes on. There was an attraction between us that we had both clearly anticipated. With each sip I could feel this evening becoming special, a fresh breath and a dull routine that allowed me to believe in love again. The tension that once gripped my heart was now a sweet clash between the desire to forget about obstacles and the hesitation to take a step forward. I felt some inner voice urging me to be careful, but another whispered that the chance for happiness must not be missed. For the first time in a long time I wasn't afraid to be embarrassed and open. Instead, I felt hope blossoming in my heart. We both knew we could face difficulties, but right now in these moments everything seemed possible. I allowed myself to drown in those feelings, certain that I was ready to accept the continuation of life even if it was difficult and full of uncertainties. I lifted my wine glass to celebrate the moment. A light slumber seemed to settle into my shoulders, and pleasure spread throughout my body. Lucas sat beside me, his presence both familiar and unsettling, looking at me with a glint in his eyes that shone with playfulness. He raised his glass and asked with a slight smile when I would finally play something special for him. His playful tone made my heart beat faster, and I felt a chill of excitement run down my spine. For a long time I'd been embarrassed at the thought of being the center of attention again, but something in his gaze warmed my soul. I hesitated, then took a deep breath and agreed. Turning on the music, gentle melodies filled the room as if they were bringing back to a world where pain and loneliness had no place. Because of this inner flood of feelings that was coming over me, I began to feel myself being drawn to him as if these notes were calling to me. With each new note there was a major nature shift in me. Each movement was a secret rhythm causing me to want to move closer to him. Music reigned in the air, and sounds that seemed simple were actually manifestations of deep, hidden motions. I caught his gaze, noticing how he heeded every note as if it were an absolute priesthood. I was lost in those melodies, not noticing time slipping away. In that moment there was an invisible connection between us, a trust that didn't require words. Lucas stepped closer, and his hands gently qued mine. I felt the warmth of his touch grounding me in this storm of emotions. There was silence, but it wasn't frightened by any sound, only the music continued to fill the space, drawing main toe its serenity. There was a softness in his voice, and what he said was akin to a whisper, but his warmth and care showed me that there was something else, something that had the power to bring me to life. I rose again, moving closer to him and feeling with excitement the melody that with its thread seemed familiar and foreign at the same time. As these sounds filled the space of our casual intimacy, I embraced him with my gaze. He was looking at me, and there was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite put my finger on, but at the same time I felt closer to him than I'd felt with anyone since Jacob. I realized I was at a crossroads, balancing joy and anxiety. Lucas was not only a neighbor Tom, but someone who could fill a space that had been empty for so long. When our eyes met, the world around us disappeared, erased, and it was just us. His arms encircled my waist, and the thrill made me feel even harder. My senses swept over me as he pulled me closer to him, and I felt more protected than ever before. It was scary, but the nostalgia of the ablution of feeling enveloped me, and that's when Lucas guided me to the couch. His confidence gave me new strength, and when I sat down his hands stayed a little longer than necessary. I felt the warmth of his touch, and it was a moment of discovery. A night with him was not just a night out, but the road to our mutual understanding. I knew that each moment was becoming part of something bigger than what it was. In that moment, in that busy evening time, I could feel life filling me up again, every sound, every look at seemed to be the beginning of a new journey that I had long dreamed of, which was now becoming a reality. The night with Lucas wasn't complete, it was just beginning to brew in my heart, finding new facets and nuances. I took all these sensations, weaving them into my soul like threads in an embroidery. A sealed moment that had become an intervention of fate. I had never felt so alive, so ready to embark in this path, a life of hope, love and tenderness, of what was yet to be experienced. There was a spark between Lucas And me that was impossible toy near one that promised to reopen in its brightest colors. It was exhilarating to realize that this night was the beginning of something new, something I had long dreamed of, but had not expected to meet so soon. Lucas and I sat on the couch, surrounded by the magic that came from our understanding and tenderness. Every moment, every glance brought us closer, and I could seem to feel the spark growing between us, filling the room with warmth and light. When I touched his hand to steady my breathing, our contact set off a storm of emotion. His fingers wrapped around mine and my heart rised at the sensation of that touch. I smiled, feeling excitement and tenderness intertwine in my heart, and in that instant I realized I couldn't imagine my life without him. Lucas was more than just a friend in times of need, was someone who could make life meaningful and happy. With every minute I spent with him, I felt his closeness sheltering me from all my worries. We continued to stare at each other, ending the silence with gentle touches that were becoming more and more familiar. Every time I caught his gaze, he told me how words couldn't express I was important to him, and he felt the same pull toward me. An endless night came, filled with soft light and sounds that were ours alone. With each new touch our souls seemed to merge, and the world around us faded away. I was almost afraid to move so as not to disturb this perfect harmony, but Lucas was there, his arms wrapped around me, confidently pulling me close to him. His walls of safety made me feel cozy and secure, and every breath he took gave me a sense of peace. But as is often the case, anxiety began to creep in. I knew that sooner or later he would have to leave. We both realized that this was a temporary happiness, and every moment of our intimacy was precious. I didn't want to let go of this moment. I didn't want him to leave. We had created this uninspiring world where no one and nothing existed but us. As the night reached its peak, I decided to put all worries aside for later. I inhaled the scent of his skin deeply, feeling his warmth penetrate deep into my soul. I pressed closer to him, and in that embrace, all the joys and sorrows, all the hopes for the future that could only be dreamed of merged. And then, when there was silence and our hearts seemed to freeze in unison, his lips fell mine. It was the first kiss, full of tenderness and passion, that lit a fire inside. In that moment, I realized that love could start in the most unexpected situations. Lucas became a part of me, and together we created something beautiful that defies explanation. I knew that this night, this connection, was just the beginning of the road we would travel, but in that moment I felt ready to open myself up to new feelings and let myself love. Letting Lucas go when his time came would be hard, but right now I was well aware that this love that had been born in my heart would never go away. I wasn't going to read tomorrow. This night would leave a mark on my soul forever, and I knew that every moment I spent with Lucas would be a memory to warm me in the days to come. No matter how our paths turned out, this love was already a part of me, and I longed to remember it forever.